Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Schools Forum. My name is Andrew Neal. I'm the chair of Forum, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The event, as always, is here in Town Hall, but it's also being broadcast live on YouTube, where members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Let's move on with the agenda. So, item A1, membership. Just a few updates on that. So let's all members know that Alison has been re-elected, representing governors, and also myself. But we do have a vacancy in the special school sector, so that is a vacancy that we are looking to fill. Apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Rebecca. Craig Hanlon. We've got some members who are not present, and we have had apologies from Pride. Has anyone else received any apologies on this?
No, Will, Pascal, and Jane won't need to give her apologies as well. So.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Any members of the forum have any interest to disclose? No? Great. Item 8.4, minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of November. Peter?
Sorry. On page 2, under 5, recommendations from Hindheath Block, I think it's appropriate to have 2, 3, 4, 5th, that schools are finding it difficult to put in place appropriate provision rather, for the amount of resources available. The point being that we can put in some provision, but not up to the standards we would wish. And then moving on, 6, page 3.6, line 2. I just stated that there was a 400,000 overspend in the current year, comma, which would lead to a reduction in the DSG deficit.
Yeah. Did you mean underspend?
Sorry, the 400,000 underspend in the current year, which would lead to a reduction in the DSG deficit. Yeah. And then on the same page, 1 below. Not quite sure about the figure, huge overspend, but anyway, huge overspend that was forecast in some cases, because not all schools have a huge overspend.
A
huge figure overspend that was forecast in some cases.
Yeah, that's different to the copy I've got here.
Oh right.
No. Or 6.
Oh, sorry. I'm reading 3.7. Yeah. Yeah, got it. Yeah, okay, that needs to be changed.
Yeah. And then over the page 4, note 3. Line 2, Estera. Is that the right way of putting it? That's how you spell it. Okay, good. And I think finally, on 611, the maths of this paragraph doesn't make sense. We're talking about a forecast overspend of 140,000. This will reduce the DSG cumulative deficit from 4.128 to 3, which is actually a deficit, an underspend of 400,000. So
I've got a feeling that 140 might be wrong. So yes,
we'll check the figures.
Yeah, I think that's a from Chan.
Thank you. Anything else from anybody else? No? Okay. All right. If we accept those amends, Is it wish the minutes to be signed as the correct record? Yeah. Okay. Okay, right, fantastic. Right, we're going to move on to item A5, and this is the annual school place planning projections report for 24-25, based on the scout return that the local authority puts in yearly. Wendy is going to come and present this. I think with Ian as well.
I don't know if you're going to put it on the screen, Wendy. I don't know if everybody's got it, then you'll grab a free seat, as it were. I'll just say a few words of introduction. We've tried, as you know, in the past couple of years, to make this projections report as streamlined as possible. So we've really keep the analysis short and really just share that data with you across the primary, secondary, but also early years, and in terms of SEN, where we know the demand is rising. There isn't a lot of change from last year or the previous years in terms of general trends, but we do think it's helpful to bring it here to forum every year. There is an accompanying paper. Given some of the data, there are some recommendations here, and it'd be really interesting to hear people's questions, and if they think there's the right recommendations, if there should be additional recommendations given what the projections are saying, and the recommendations relate, you might expect, to surplus capacity in primary, but also given that funding for schools is pupil-led, the related paper that Anita will come to about schools in deficit and smaller schools, more schools moving into deficit, has been really mindful of the impacts of these changing demographics on schools and how we work together to maintain the broad curriculum offer, maintain standards, maintain the viability of our schools wherever possible. So a bit of an intro, and over to you, Wendy, for the detail.
Thank you. I won't put it up on screen because it takes too long to work that one out. I think you've all got the copy, so I'm just go through and just highlight the points in the report. So to set out context, as you know, we do this every year. I think the first thing that's really important to set out is which is what we get asked a lot, is about housing. Because in the grand picture of place planning, it's not just we have to think about the infrastructure and how that can impact on our place planning. And housing is key to that. So most of you probably know that you've probably seen some of the information that's been mentioned for several years now, the Kensal Rise development, proposed development, and Earls Court, which has been talked about for many, many years. Both are quite ambitious projects, but they're quite far ahead in time also. So even though hopefully they will bring new housing to the borough, which is much needed, particularly social housing, they're not at a level yet where we can think about considering child yield that may come from those projects, because there isn't any child yield really that we can really take into account. Do we know how much social housing there will be? There can be suggestions made in consultations, but whether we will achieve that, and it's not just a Kensington thing; it's a London-wide city plan and ambition to have more social housing. So it's good to know and understand that there is housing coming, but as it stands at the moment, and when I go through this report, you can see that there is still significant surplus capacity across primary. So if there was housing coming in, you could actually accommodate any additional children that might come into the borough. I think it's also worth taking into account that there's also schools that have reduced their numbers over the past couple of years, but they've reduced their numbers, but the school size is still exactly the same. So if there was a sudden demand that we didn't anticipate coming in of families, there's always the option to increase those numbers back up in those schools without having to have a new school or rebuild a new school. So that's why it's always good to sort of utilise the spare space in schools for other education purposes, always mindful that we might need those places back again.
Just add to that, Wendy. So absolutely, as you said, there isn't a rationale for us, working with the planning department to put a bid into developer space. We're a bit of a stage now where those discussions are happening with Earl's Course and what's being put forward. But we are able to say, whilst there isn't demand for, let's say, more primary places or secondary places that can't be met through kind of local plans that are underway, demand for SEN provision is rising. So we are saying to the developer, actually, is there a contribution that could be made, perhaps to a new resource space or to fund, development of another satellite to our special school. So we're trying to be creative in what we ask the developer for. We're also mindful of other areas of growth around early years and childcare provision. So we're trying to be quite creative in what we ask the developer for, because as Wendy said, we can't, given these projections, ask for capital funding for more school places.
Thanks, Ian. So moving on, I'm also to set the picture for place planning is we have to consider the independent school breakdown in this, and obviously the VAT, 20% VAT that the local central government have imposed on independent schools, the increase in costs. So I think it's important to see the breakdown of the high proportion of resident children in Kensington and Chelsea that do go to the independent sector. And it's been pretty stable for many, many years. In all the years I've been here, I haven't really seen much fluctuation in that, with 48% roughly primary age children in the independent sector, and a higher number, almost 60% of secondary age children in secondary independent schools. We get asked often, and there's been lots of inquiries and media coverage of, will the VAT increase make a difference to this? Are we suddenly going to see an influx of families pulling their children out of independent schools into state schools? As far as in new admissions go, we haven't seen that. That isn't the case at this moment in time. It's obviously a very changing picture. We don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months. It is fair to say that we have seen an increase in applications for reception this year. Closing date is today. For schools that are particularly popular in Kensington and Chelsea. And these are the schools that historically we see parents applying for, and then maybe sometimes getting offered a place and then removing their offer because they've also been offered an independent school. We see that historically year on, year out. So I suppose the question will be will that parent withdraw that offer and stay and keep their state school offer? So we don't know how that's going to pan out yet. It might well be the case. So that is an unknown at this point in time, whether we're going to see that. And if they do not get the school that they've applied for, will they take up an offer of another school we might offer them? We don't know that yet either. So that is something that is a changing pattern. And schools that are the ones that I'm talking about will know, because they probably have seen a lot more children wanting to have a look around their schools. So the in-year, no, we haven't seen a lot of changes. Reception is, watch this space. Let's see how that will pan out. So moving on to the school roll projections, that's just to give you and remind you of the methodology that we use for projections, which is the GLA methodology, which all London boroughs are subscribed to. But we also use our local intelligence and on the ground information that we match up with this to make sure that the information that we have is as accurate as it can be. I've been doing this for some years and we haven't really been out by that much. It's always been fairly consistent. So I think we can be really confident in what's being presented here. Obviously with forecast, we never know what's going to happen in the future. We can only go by what we know today. Lots of things can change patterns in how that will bring families into the borough or out of the borough. So moving on to primary school projections. They are forecast for 5 years forward, based on information that we know already. And Kensington and Chelsea has 2 planning areas, north and south. It would be useful to have a central planning area, to be fair, but that's not our decision to make. That's the DfE that set the planning areas. So based on the spring census and the numbers of available places as of October, we currently have across Kensington and Chelsea an 18% surplus of primary school places. Looking at that overall area, you can see that the line continues to go downwards, as it has done the last year. I presented this in the year before and the year before that. So we are seeing it continuing to go down. So, we have to consider that when we're looking at what to do next. When we're looking at the south area always has less surplus than the north, but that's not to say it still doesn't have surplus. It does. But I think when we're looking at place planning, we don't want to just make decisions about removal of capacity or any other decisions, just looking in north and just looking in south. This is a very small borough, so we have to, we sometimes have to take that line out of this and consider and take other factors into it, such as schools that are struggling with their deficits and budgets, and all those other factors play into place planning agenda. So looking at the north, which has always been the area of the borough that's had the highest condensed surplus, it has increased since last year, even though we have taken some capacity out of the north. And the forecast is the numbers are going to continue to decline. So that is a concern that colleagues need to consider when looking at the recommendations.
And if I just chip in, Wendy, in the covering report that we provided in 4.3, you included the very latest October census data, which was finalised, this month. So we know now that surplus has gone up slightly. It's now 19.3%.
Yeah.
But at the time, as Wendy said, there's a statutory return. We were at 18%, and that's where these projections come from. It has gone up slightly, as it does, each term. It can change each term.
Yeah. Okay, so just moving into the surplus capacity in the borough. So the surplus, if we have a look at the graph or the graph slide with the 4 lines, the 4 coloured lines, I think that's the interesting one. So if you have a look at the projected surplus, the blue line, which is the GLA modelling line, so that's what the GLA provide us, and they look at our roll numbers and everything else, and that's what they see for us as a borough, the projections going forward. And then you look at the yellow line and the black line, which is the London line and the national line. Obviously, where London is well above national, most boroughs are well above national, but London, you can see it's a problem with surplus capacity in primary schools. We are below the London average, and the green line is our local line, that takes into account the capacity we've already removed, which will be on the slide that I'm going to come to, and capacity that is proposed to be removed in 2025. There is more capacity that has been consulted on to be removed for 2026. So that line will come down slightly further. But what we want to do is get that line down, that green line going downwards. We want to buck the trend. We don't want to be in 2027 at 25.4%, which is what's being projected by the GLA. Okay, so also considering the factors as well, it's always good to know what the makeup of the schools are, the primary schools, in respect of the resident population. So we have quite a high number of children from in primary schools that come from other boroughs, but the predominant, the majority of children are from Kensington and Chelsea. So we do have quite a lot feeding from other boroughs, particularly the schools that are close to the borders. The reception trends, it's just showing you what the surplus capacity was at each time we did the reception intake. I think we might see that trend change for this year because of the additional applications we're seeing for coming, I believe, from families that will be applying for the independent sector. So we might see that bar chart go down when I'm sitting here next year. But, you know, it's quite it's not a huge amount compared to Westminster, which is at 26%. So that gives you an idea of what's going on in neighbouring boroughs. And I know there's other boroughs that have also got much higher surplus than Kensington and Chelsea. So that's not too painful, that bar chart to look at.
And I think the other thing is when you probably, I'm sure you would agree, that surplus capacity across the reception year group isn't evenly distributed. So some schools are affected more than others, despite 8% being, manageable relatively across London.
Yeah, some of that is condensed in certain schools. In other schools are heavily oversubscribed with long waiting lists, and that will always be the case.
And I'm also going to say, just on the floor, that will be against published admission numbers. It won't take account of temporary caps.
No,
because the GLA doesn't either. But perhaps come back to the annual discussion about temporary caps if there are questions.
So the next slide just gives you an idea of what's been done so far. When we set up the ISOS partnership group a few years ago now, that was assisting us in Westminster with this issue and some other boroughs, the recommendation at that time was to look to remove 1 to 2 forms of entry. Well, we've already achieved that, and we're still in a very similar position. So, that was the suggestion at the time, but it hasn't. It has made a difference, and that green line showing the difference it has made. But we need to do more. Okay, going on to secondary projections, which is a very different picture completely, and it has always been the case. The secondary, there's 6 schools, as you know, in Kensington, Chelsea, so not as many as primary schools. We're currently, based on the numbers of children on roll and the number of available places, we're actually reporting a deficit, which means that there's no free places. But bearing in mind, we need to take into account that there are 2 schools that are in the process of expanding, and they have been taking bulge classes over a number of years to accommodate all the additional children we need to place. So that those bulge classes are not reflected in the pan. So that's why we're reporting a deficit. There are some places available in a few schools, but they're very minimal places available. But because we are so close to other boroughs and the geographical location of schools and the travel patterns for secondary age children, it does mean that we can direct parents to other neighbouring boroughs such as Hammersmith or Fulham or Camden or Wandsworth or even Westminster, where there may be some boys' places. So we do, even though there's a responsibility for the council to ensure resident children have a school place, that responsibility isn't a Kensington and Chelsea school. It could be any school that's in a reasonable distance to travel. So we can meet our statutory duty, so there isn't a concern there. But as with, if you go on to the actual planning area, there's only one planning area for secondary because there's only 6 schools. That mountain that goes down, it does look a bit scary. It looks like there's going to be no children at all when you see that big drop, but that's because of the scale of how it's presented. It's not actually a huge drop. What we actually want some surplus capacity in our secondary schools because we need that movement. So the projections, when you look at the forecast, taking into account the additional places that All Saints will have and KAA will have, it's forecasting a surplus of about 9%. But I actually don't think it'll be as much as that. But that's what it's forecast. If it is 9%, that's great. We could work with that. And that would be very comfortable for us to have 9% surplus. So I think with secondary, even though schools may be concerned about the drop, if you go on to the next slide, when you look at the makeup of the population of these schools in Kensington, it makes sense when you see that red line, which is the Kensington and Chelsea residents falling, because actually the primary cohort that's going through is obviously less. And you see the green line rising slightly, where you've got the popularity of the school still attracting all those neighbouring borough residents, which they always will do. So this is a completely different picture for primary and secondary because of the makeup of the population. There's some information as well in here. Park Place planning, as Ian alluded to, also covers special educational needs and making sure we've got sufficient provision. This is continually an area of higher demand, and you could ask, well, why is it we've got less children coming through but we've got higher needs? I think that's probably just earlier diagnosis and lots of other reasons for that. Obviously, Julie's area does a great job working with schools to put in additional, or looking for areas where we can put in additional provision. And I think one good thing, you know, a positive out of a negative when we are looking at removing capacity from primary schools, it does present an opportunity to utilise that capacity that we're freeing up to maybe put in satellite or resource spaces for our for this area where there's a high spend of sending children to independent special. We want to try and keep them in borough where we can. So there's just a couple of slides there. I mean, Julie's here if you've got any questions on that. And there's just a little bit of an update there on early years as well, and how space is being utilised for that. I know Heracles is working hard on looking at a 2-year-old offer, and you know where obviously that's changed. Where there's I know there's been quite a lot of demand for that, hasn't there, in Kensington and Chelsea? So yeah, so they're the key points for this year's report. So happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, great, thanks, Wendy. So it's an extremely comprehensive report. Thank you so much for presenting that as always. Just before we take questions, just a reminder to the colleagues on the forum that, you know, what we always say is we leave our own schools at the door, and also just a reminder that, you know, in regard to this, is a pretty sensitive subject around forming roles, that we as a forum don't make any decisions on individual schools whatsoever. As you'll see in the recommendation, the only thing that we can consider and note is the direction of travel and reduction of form classes, which is slightly different to which schools they may be. Are there any questions on the numbers, Peter?
Yeah, in relation to this court development, I attended the one of the public open days, I think last Easter. It's a pretty huge development, and I'm asking an open question. There must be an awful lot of 106 money or whatever the sort of service contribution is. I mean, are you seriously not going to make any bid for any of it?
Well, you don't bid for Section 106. It comes as part and parcel of the capital project.
Indeed. So I think the point there, that's a good question, Peter. I'm sorry for that, make it clear earlier on. We're not able to bid for capital funding for additional mainstream school places, primary or secondary, because the projections don't justify it. And obviously, we're looking well into the future. Okay. But I did say, it's Wendy's point, that because we do see demand rising, but children education, health and care plans, and whilst our demand is a lot lower than national, as Julia was also to say, because there's some great provision at SEN support level, we have via planning said to the developer, actually, is there a contribution that could be put into existing school provision, maybe in the way Wendy's described, funding towards a satellite at a primary school that has space or a new resource space. Obviously, we have to link that to demographics in the central area, in the Earls Court area. Obviously, we're mindful that a big chunk of this development is over in Hammersmith and Fulham rather than K&C. As I mentioned earlier, we've also flagged needs around early years and childcare provision. So we'll absolutely see if we can get contributions for children's services provision more broadly, but not for mainstream school places, because the evidence isn't there.
Thank you.
Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, you already alluded to temporary pans, and I certainly know of one school that's got temporary pans at different year groups, and I wondered whether you've looked at, unofficially of course, how the PANs have got the temporary caps, agreed temporary caps across the different schools in the borough might impact on this line and whether if they became permanent, where we'd be at.
Yeah, I mean, I have done some modelling on that, but it will bring the line down definitely.
Dramatically or only marginally?
I think where there are caps, I think the problem is some schools have caps in some year groups, and other schools have caps, but not many across the whole. I think the message and what we're trying message is if you're consistently capping across all year groups, you need to be reducing your PAN permanently, because you can't continue capping because it's not recognised legally. I think if I turned that into a permanent, it would bring that green line down quite dramatically. It would, yeah.
So just for clarification, we're roughly 2.5 more, just over 2.5 times the sort of sweet spot of surplus.
Yeah.
It's quite significant.
Yeah.
Just to put it into that perspective. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what you presented last year, to be honest. David.
Which is kind of my question really, 5.2. So, the recommendations consider whether a further reduction of 2 forms of entry across the primary sector is required over the next 2 years, be achieved by 2027. I mean, maybe I've misunderstood something, but it sounds like, from what you've said, Wendy, this isn't about whether we consider it. It sounds like the writing's on the wall that this is something that is going to happen. And in terms of that, then I suppose a question for Ian, which is how and when was that process commenced? Because certainly my peers want to know that. Certainly those who have schools with falling roles, and they cannot see a way in the short term to rectify.
Well, I think on that, I mean, what Wendy says it out very well. Some schools sensibly have made a local arrangement with Wendy and the team around temporary capping, and for schools that are, officially 2 forms of entry, 1.5 forms of entry, and they're not filling, moving permanently to 1 form of entry. And I know, Wendy, you were talking to schools actually both of us, weren't you, before Christmas, because the window to consult on reducing your PAN for September 26 was, the end of the last calendar year. But those discussions can happen any time of the year. That might be one way in which that 2 forms of entry could be achieved. It might be a half at one school, a half at another. I think on one of the earlier charts you gave the example of Brunel, which has decided as an academy to reduce its numbers permanently from 60 a year to 30 a year. That might be one way of achieving it. And I think, David, on the back of all the work we did, the engagements through the ISOS partnership work, a really good model of practice emerged, which was schools themselves, governing bodies, hence having a really close look at the data. The context of every school is different, and some schools say, well, we can manage this, or either we're running early years provision, or we're going to host SDM provision. Other schools are saying, actually, we are going into deficit. We're larger than 1 form of entry. We're going to make this change. We're going to adjust the number of staffing we've got to match the number of children we've got, and actually we remain viable. We've got that curriculum offer, and so I think the advice comes together partly through Sarah in Anita's team, because obviously we have extra resource to help schools to plan where they may be at risk of going into deficit or the reserves are really dwindling, but also Shelley's team, the lead advisor team, really to try and join up that support. And for a number of church schools, we always try and join it with the diocese as well, so that that advice is there. Governors are able to hopefully take a long-term view, consider the options, and if they do then decide to consult on reducing published admission number, then obviously they have our support. It's a well thought through approach and it fits with their budget planning. What I do need to flag, and I think it links to 5.3, is we have a small number of 1 form entry schools who do have surplus capacity. I want to acknowledge that it's really tough, because those schools have fixed costs and the economies of scale and not there on your side. I think where we've talked about it previously, in previous years, we've not quite seen a significant surplus at any of those 1 form entry schools. But we are starting to see that now, and I think those schools know that better than I do. So it may well be that despite best efforts, some of those 1 form entry schools aren't able to set a 3-year balanced budget. They aren't able to produce a deficit recovery plan. We will do our very best through Anita's team, Shelley's team, myself, if needed, to really try and help schools to agree that plan. If not, I would encourage those schools to consider an alternative plan, which may be 2 governing bodies partnering up to say, we think we want to amalgamate 2 schools on
I mean,
one side.
broadly speaking, this is not a novel problem. We're learning about
It's
this.
happening. It's happening across London.
And it's not like we're going to have this meeting and make some decisions and get on with the work tomorrow, because it's been ongoing, and it's just an extension of the work that's been taking place over the last decade, really,
Yeah.
particularly in the primary sector, as challenging as that is, I think.
The important point is we're not the body that's going to make the decision. It's the governing boards of the individual schools.
Correct.
So I think it's a lot
With
of fear
officers,
last time, wasn't it?
it's officers who will have those conversations with heads and governors.
And I think this is why Wendy's report comes here first, because it's really helpful to get that strategic view from all of you about the projections and the implications, given this is our statutory funding body, for small schools and potential risk of schools going into deficit, and trying to be ahead of the curve and offer that advice and support at an early stage. We had 2 schools in deficit at the end of last financial year. You'll see the figures in the next paper. It's going to be 5 schools. So let's work together and put that advice and support there in a coordinated way before a school says, gosh, we're heavily in deficit, we're really stuck, our numbers are down. And it's frankly for the governing body, with the maintaining authority, with the diocese, it's a bigger problem to solve.
Isn't our role though partially in 5.3? It's almost a scrutiny role, isn't it, to make sure that at each meeting that we have, to really push back to you to say you're supporting, you're advising. Well, what does that look like? What are you really doing? Because these people can't do it on their own, particularly in the very small 1-4 elementary schools.
Well, I think particularly for 5.3, it's a statutory role that we have for schools that the local authority maintains, which is the majority of primary schools, which is that schools aren't. The DfE requires us to require those schools to set a balanced 3-year budget, and if they are in deficit, to seek to repay that within 3 years. We recognise this a lot over in Westminster. It's not always possible to repay in 3 years, but if schools are able to see a way through this, through developing new provision, or if they think the numbers might rise at a particular school, maybe linked to a rise in standards, then all well and good. But if not, what we would report to you here is the number of schools in deficit, those that have a deficit recovery plan agreed and those that don't. Absolutely, it's for the governing body to agree the budget plan, in my view, and to say this is a realistic deficit recovery plan. It's no point sending the plan through to Anita and the team, me, if the governors haven't been through it. And we've definitely got, a good half dozen schools in Westminster that work so hard to agree that plan, and they've not been able to do that. And so there's no point in sending it through to us to license, but that's our statutory role. I think as we get to 5 schools in deficit at the end of this financial year, more of those conversations will be needed. It means that we'll need to put more resource in, I think, through Shelley's team and with Anita's team, to really help those schools to do that modelling and planning.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Jackie.
Just a couple of observations, really. I've enjoyed your reports of the years. I prefer them when numbers are going up. But one of the things I think that we've always talked about is primary surplus places in the north. One of the things that we aren't talking about as often, and probably do now need to talk about, is primary surplus places in the south. Because that trend line is actually more acute in the south.
It's an 8% drop, and I think the north there's only 6.
Yeah. And actually it's over a shorter period than the north as well. And I think that the way the places fall in the south, it's more concentrated on certain schools than it is in the north. There's actually much more spread in the north, in the right part of the borough, and I think that will make different decisions. And but that's not, like I said, it's not for us to decide. But I know the Oscott development is going to come along, but it might be too late for people. And actually, how we use that part of the estate and how you could use the Section 106 funding rather than for a resource base, we really need a school in the south. We really need a special school in the south. Yeah.
I think when you made the point about child yield and really not factoring that in.
Yeah, I mean, we can't factor it in yet because we don't know what it will be.
And it may just be rehousing current residents.
Yeah, it could be. It could be, you know, people that moving into social housing might be families already in, you know, with children in school, but they're going from lots of good accommodation to better accommodation. So we can't assume that, you know, that new housing is going to generate new families. Or they could be in temporary housing in the borough. So yeah, there's so many things to consider. I think what's the mistake that's been made in the past, and I don't mean here, I mean just generally, is overestimating child yield. And then to have all these new schools pop up, and I'm talking about prior to 2010, and then they find that they overestimated the need, and then you're in a situation like you're in now when you've got too many schools and not enough children.
And we just can't get away from the fact that the birth rate has been falling starkly across London for over 10 years now, and that is continuing. And that is the key driver here. It is the demographics, and we know what the trend is.
The latest demographics showing an even greater reduction in our boroughs, isn't it?
Yes,
yes,
right.
Okay, any other questions on this? Okay, thanks everyone. Mr. Bill, so far was asked to notify one, the people, still place plan projections for 24-25. 5.2, considering whether the reduction of two forms of entry across the private sector is required over the next 2 years. Is that an agreement, or is it just a consideration?
Well, is this an agreed recommendation from forum? I think it's because obviously what will happen with the report, we will go to heads groups, governors forum, education partnership. So it's helpful to have that recommendation agreed or not, but by forum.
Okay, and then 5.3, ensure that primary schools are deficit, no projected to be in deficit, provided support advice in order to produce balanced 3-year budgets, including the deficit recovery plans when necessary. All noted? Okay, yeah. Right, let's move on to A6 DSG budget monitoring for council school balances. Elise, will over to you.
Thank you. You'll see in the report when you look at table 2 in terms of the forecast position for year end DSG, that overall we are forecasting a 433,000 in year underspend. That is less than the planned 865,000 contribution to the deficit that we had in the previously agreed deficit management plan. But that reflects the increase in the mainstream top-ups after earlier discussions, and as was agreed at the last forum in November. You'll see that, it will also note that the DSG deficits are currently ring-fenced from the council's wider finances, but I feel I need to remind forum that the ring-fence is due to end in March 2026.
Is that statutory override?
Yes, that's a statutory override.
And is it definitely going to end, or is that on the table?
That is something we're waiting to hear whether that will change, but that is currently positioned, and obviously that's then something that would have to be covered by the council generally reserves.
It's been extended before, hasn't it?
Yes,
That's
yes.
overrun, but we have no intelligence to say it's going to be extended again, but it has been before.
Yeah. And the other key area within the paper is on page 46 under 3.1 in relation to early years. So now that we've done the final reconciliation of the 2023-24 early years funding, forum will recall we get that final adjustment. We got that in the current financial year, and that means that there is 778,612 available to be redistributed to early years providers. So we will increase the hourly rate for providers, so based on 2023-24 numbers, and so it'll be a one-off payment that we'll make in the current financial year. As a very rough idea, because we're getting the numbers from the system as to what we thought would be paying out, I'd say it would be about a 50 pence per hour increase, and that's something like a 7.5% increase compared to the rate in 23-24. So that doesn't come out as a huge difference, but it probably adds a couple of thousand to primary schools with nurseries. Just to be clear, that this hourly rate applies to maintain nursery schools, primary schools with nurseries, and also the private voluntary and independent sector that is applied across the board.
Can I just check, because we talked about that last time, so it includes the group of nurseries where there were concerns in the last meeting, so that there will be some additional funding.
Yes, yes,
In a
absolutely.
one-off
Yes.
payment.
And as has already been mentioned, when you move on to section 5, you see the school balances, and I am repeating, but I really don't need to. The increase from 2 schools that are currently in deficit to expected to be 5 schools by the end of this financial year.
Okay, right, any questions on this paper for Anita?
Yeah, on 4.2, I've looked through the council's accounts, all 159 pages. I can't actually find where the money is coming, where the deficit is recorded at the moment. Maybe you can come back to me on that. But I mean, the second question I had is, how does this difference in charging it direct to the council's general reserves? What difference does that make? Does that mean it's identified under section note 29, which is the debtors section? Sorry, I'm reading off the council account, but I just can't see what is going to be. I suppose my bottom line is, what is going to be the impact if this goes through on our activities?
So the difference is that currently it is completely ring fenced, set aside. The council don't have to show how they're going to cover
It's of
the
balance
deficit.
sheet.
Yes, effectively, yes. But it will then come in as one of the councils. It will be a negative reserve
Yeah,
that has to show overall the council has to fund it within their net reserves.
right. Which stand at 1.741 billion.
Sorry, I don't know that.
It's not that much.
If we're not there yet, there's an override in place.
Right.
Okay, what we're explaining here is that deficit would need to be recorded and funded differently if the government changes
Yeah,
the law.
but does it make any difference to the operation of the budget deficit? I mean, is it going to have
No.
interest
I don't think so.
on it, for example?
For RBKC in its current position, it wouldn't. But if you take, say, Bournemouth Council, who've got a deficit on the high needs block that's running into the hundreds of millions, it would bankrupt. So I think in the current position, as of the end of financial year 2024, nearly 2/3 of councils would be bankrupted if they remove their section 116. Is it override?
I can't remember the section. But
So if they remove
did.
it, so that's why it's in place. But for RBKC, we're probably the only council that has reduced the deficits out of the high needs block in the country. So it's a smaller quantum of money that wouldn't have the same sort of.
Yeah, we're not in the same. Our risk is nothing like the risk for a number of other local authorities.
Okay.
It does become a budget pressure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
That's
for us to worry about. Yeah.
Thank you.
A good spot, and well done for reading all three.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was
It was exciting.
And understand.
yeah, exactly. Any other questions on this paper? Okay, all right, thanks, Anita. So Paul is asked to, I won't read all 611 because there's a lot of numbers there that Anita's just on them. To note 611 and 612, the potential increase in the number of schools with deficits, and that support will be provided to schools most at risk going into deficits.
And I think on that, Jack, there's probably a bit of an overlap with the recommendation of the previous paper, but I think it's really to demonstrate the commitment agreed at forum to support those schools, given the increased risk.
Okay, great. Let's move on to paper 87, which is the DSG's schools funding formula allocations for next year. Now we've obviously agreed the move towards the NFF in a previous meeting, and I think just to note on the sentence that we've just double checked is that these figures don't include the additional national insurance contributions that the Chancellor has spoken that the public sector services will get. So they're not included in these figures.
Yes, we are waiting for the methodology for how those funds will be distributed. But if I had to predict, I would say it probably be something similar to the core school budget grant.
Yeah, another named grant. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I don't mind if they keep coming, to be honest. Lisa.
Yes, so I'm going to put you to table 1 that's at the top of page 55 in the pack, and you will see that overall the DSG has increased by just over 3%, and but with larger increases in early years and in high needs. And then if you turn to page 58 and look at the funding in the schools block and the proposal there. So you'll see the bottom line of that table that the per pupil increase is 2.6%. I realise that's across the borough. That doesn't mean every school gets an increase of 2.6% per pupil. And Andrew's already said that we're, as agreed, the methodology is of the funding to be distributed is a 10% move towards the national funding formula factor values. We've used the minimum funding guarantee as the maximum that we could have, which was a 0% reduction compared to 24-25 per pupil funding. In the information provided by the DFE, so while we're seeing a 2.6 per pupil increase, nationally we're told that 1.28% of funds will pay the full year effect of the teachers' pay award in 2024. So it's not all new money. It also within the school's budgets, all the pay grants, so other than what will be the national insurance pay grant, have been rolled into the funding. So there's no separate funding for pay awards. There'll only be the one that relates to the national insurance. I'll mention here that is different for special schools in that there will still be a separate core school budget grant. But mainstream, there's no expectation because nationally the expectation is that the public sector pay awards will be at 2.8%. I realise that hasn't all been formally agreed, but government's view is that is affordable, and therefore there will be no separate pay award for 2025 pay awards. That is the view at this time. What I'm saying is what you've got here is the funding you're going to get and you need to use in planning apart from the national insurance increase. Unfortunately, in the figures that have been calculated and in the table at the bottom of page 56, growth funding has been omitted from the calculations. And as per the methodology that's agreed with Schools Forum, we need to fund 60,000 for the final year, September 2025, expansion at All Saints from 5 to 6 forms of entry. So that will affect each school marginally because obviously we'll be taking that funding out overall, but the balance will still come to the same total that we're distributing. I think that is everything I want to raise.
Thanks, Anita. Any questions on paper A7? No? Okay, all right, so we'll form us to 641 agree the local funding formula distributes 88.9 million funding. 612, note the school formula agreement to transfer the 0.5% from the school block over to the high needs block. It's part of the deficit management plan agreed this time last year. agree the delegation of 126,000 for traveller children and teachers to 2 schools in section 4.7. 614, confirm the delegation agreed at 200,000 to fund reorganisation costs for maintained schools to meet the requirements in the scheme for financing schools. And 615, confirm the delegation of 130,000 for the loss of the school intervention and brokering grants. And all those balance for maintained schools only. All in agreement? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, fantastic. Right, thank you. Move on to paper A8. Julie, over to you.
Thank you. This report gives an update on the highest forecast for the current year and recommendations for the budget for 25-26. The highly got reference group hasn't actually met since the last forum, but at the last forum we did make a decision to increase the top-up rate. So this is giving the kind of latest position. Obviously, we have a cumulative deficit, but in para 1-2, we're emphasising the journey that we're on and the steps that we've taken to reduce it and where we think we'll be. And in para 9-1, we actually say that we think 24-25, the deficit will be 3.695. Section 4 of the report gives an update on the ongoing focus of grant activity. And please will remember this is a 2-year grant in the Department of Education. We had the monitoring meeting for phase 3 of the second year with the DFE today. We received very positive feedback from them about the impacts that we've been able to demonstrate we've had in using that funding. And they emphasised that in our final quarter, they'd really like to see us kind of capture all of the learning that's happened and the legacy and the steps that we've taken to kind of sustain some of the changes that we've been able to make using this £1 million grant that we've had. We did at the last forum talk about increasing the top-up rates for mainstream, and we will be bringing to the next forum for the new financial year recommendations for the rates for special and specialist resource provision. There was a note in the paper that we'll be doing that. The document references the historic pay and pension additional DSG, and then sets out a number of the budget headings and just as how we propose to kind of cover the budgets for next year based on what we know about our actual spend this year. We've gone through the report, sets out budget heading by budget heading. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
It's probably a minor point under it next to when this report earlier. In 5.4, Julie, where you talk about the increasing places, second line from the bottom, and Kensington Queensmead, that's not all of the main site, is it? That includes satellite provision? Is that right?
That's right. Satellite provision. Obviously, we're developing plans for second satellite. And as Jackie mentioned about a new special school in all the places don't have to be in the special school. They can be in satellite provision. Yeah.
And whilst we do have high needs capital to fund that, obviously, as well as developing the school, and then the revenue follows. It's a helpful suggestion. As I said, we're talking to developers about whether there is an additional capital contribution that can assist with creating this local provision.
Can I just say, as both Chris see this list, I mean, it does mean the boroughs, getting on with setting up specialist services for autism and other specialist resource provision pupils.
And it might be reassuring to know this is where we are now, but there are lots of conversations happening about, we created the specialist provision at Preston Junction, but we were already thinking about, if young people at 16, where are they going to go? Mm-hmm. We've also been doing lots of preparation in terms of the much younger children and how we intervene.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's worth noting and coming back to this, and I've said this before, but the position that we are in terms of we have a deficit, but compared to other local authorities, that deficit is very small and improving. So we are, as I said, few minutes ago, the only local authority who is moving in the right direction on that. And I think that is testament to the work of obviously Julie and her strategic work with Ian and Anita, but also that the high needs reference group over the last however many years they've been going, about 6 years or so, 7 years. And also that decision to move to this structure of working with children with special needs, which is in line with where the government are going anyway with inclusive mainstream. So we're already ahead of the curve on that, and I think a lot of the local authorities are playing catch up and looking at our local authorities' model practice. So I think there's a lot of great work that's been done on this.
I have to say, as we have highly inclusive schools as well, who do a great job where parents are saying we do want a local place for our child. Without getting to the whole piece about SEN assessment and the reviews, we all recognise that there are limits and the needs are becoming more complex, but it is a chance to say, actually, all of this work and the capital investment, the additional revenue, that wouldn't happen if schools weren't willing to say, yes, we will have a little spaces. We have got space for Southline. Actually, we will give it a go and try and support this really complex child in mainstream. So it's a whole system approach, I think, that's led to where we are today.
And it doesn't mean there are pressures and real challenges and difficulties in having got to this place and we're currently living with, but I think we're in a better position than most. Jacob, do you have
I just want to add to what you're just saying, actually. Thank you for giving us the rise in funding for EBT in the last financial year. Looking into the next financial year, looking at these numbers, and you start thinking about modelling what it would look like to give us a rise in the next financial year. Because pressures are only getting greater, and actually in schools where we have massive numbers of children with SEND needs, with fewer children in the school, there's a disproportionate hit in terms of that, and that then means that we need, and even if we get the inflation rise from government for NI, it won't cover the overall cost, the cost for every person that we've got working with every child with SEND needs. So we will need a larger rise if that's possible. Please.
We will need to look at it, yeah.
Okay. And Shadi, any other questions on this? No? Okay, right, thanks everybody. So in terms of points, all that's to approve, all on page 75, 10.2 on the high, you've got forecasting additionally cumulative deficit position. 10.2 the ongoing focus of grant funded activity through DBE. 10.2.3 the 25-26 funding for historic teachers parent pensions contributions for special AP hospital providers. As noted there, 10.2 the annual review of top-ups for SLPs and special schools will take place, and 10.2 the full plan for the high needs block reference group. Agreed. Right, okay. Finally, we move on to item 9, which is a fairly near budget central allocation. I think the lattice is going on for this. So, Josh.
We've got your badges down here, but we know who you are, so just pretend they're at the other end of the table.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
It's brilliant both Russell and myself for doing a double act.
Yeah.
Yes, so the ESFA is the initial allocation areas in December, and this is based on the January 24 census. So this will change what the 2025 census is updated on the allocations. And that's what the table in 2.1 is showing the change with the allocations. The main changes from in 25-26 are listed in 2.2. The main one being the increased minimum pass-through requirement from 95% to 96%. So just speaking about that in 325 in a little bit more detail, but yeah, so that will be from this year, and then in the following year, it's intended that it will be going up to 97%, depending on how severe it be. And 3.4 one and reference to was is just showing the increase in the hourly rate from in 25-26. So just to run through, for 3 to 4 year olds, that's an increase of just under 0.5%. For the disadvantaged 2 year olds and the working family, a 2 year old working family entitlement, that's an increase of 3.3%. For the 9 to 2 year old working family entitlement, that's an increase of 4%. And sorry, just in the page over, for the early years pupil premium, the maintained nursery supplement, the maintained nursery supplement is an increase of 21.9%. For the early years per pupil premium, it's an increase of, work down 47%. So that's from 68p per £1. And for the disability access one, that's an increase of 3%. The Appendix A is just showing the calculation of the new hourly rate of 25-26. Of that, in the calculation, you can see of the 96%, what's set aside is the deprivation at 10% of the hourly rate, of the hourly pass-through rate, 1.8% of the standing inclusion fund, and 3% of contingency funding. And that's all shown in the calculation in the MSA. Also, just 3.10, as agreed in the last forum, we maintain nursery supplement funding will be split based on the ratio of current funding, which is inclusive of the rental and slash service cost, and that will be as a phased approach, 3-year phased approach, starting from April 25. And just on paragraph 4 on the National Wraparound Childcare Programme. So that is that program has the first payment for this year started going through up to March and December 24 now. And whilst we have an initial allocation for 25-26, we will have an updated allocation for 25-26 in May of this year, I think, because once the new delivery plans are completed.
Yeah, is that everything?
I don't know whether it would be worth mentioning SENIF as well, but it's calculated before we agree the pass-through rate. Yes, yeah, that's just an okay mark in Westminster, but the SENIF allocation comes out of the main block, if you like, the early years block, and we have not increased that amount for a number of years, but we are reviewing this for the following financial year because the feedback we have had. I mean, Amy knows, so we've had a working group and we're reviewing all of this. So the following year, it could be that we will increase the SENIF allocation, but for this financial year, it remains the same.
Any questions on?
And just to make it clear, the numbers in this paper exclude the earlier mentioned rebate.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Separately. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? All happy? Okay. So if forum is recommended to 5.1 note the methodology that's outlined there. I'd like to ask to note the budget set aside for contingency. 5.3 ask to note the increase in funding to maintain nurseries in line with the increased rate from 25-26, and 5.4 ask to consider the concept of report and agree the hourly rates to be paid to providers for early years childcare and education in 25-26 as set out in Appendix A. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Right, well that draws to the main part of meetings to the close. Just I think 2 final things. Firstly, just a congratulations to the local authority on their most recent Ofsted inspection, in which they had, well, we were talking about in our heads meeting earlier, 20 inspectors over how many days?
20 inspectors, 2 boroughs, 2 weeks, something like that. Fairly
quite exceptional outcome.
Indeed. So but in fact, Council Chelsea and Westminster are the first 2 authorities in the country to get 3 successive outstanding judgments for children's services. But that's also a thank you. Well, thank you to all of you, because obviously what Ofsted saw was the way in which the whole system works together, particularly in terms of protection and support for vulnerable children. And many of you gave time, your staff did at short notice to speak to inspectors, your designated safeguarding lead, designated teacher who looks after children. And we really appreciate, staff's flexibility and, our self-evaluation with you, which we shared with you, and particularly my colleague Dan Beach, turning out to be excellent. So give that to you.
Brilliant. That's fantastic news. Well done. And then Anita, finally over to you. You're going to speak about Alison and Alison's work.
Yeah, unfortunately, Alison's not at the meeting, but I just wanted to do, for those of you that know Alison Pryor, who's been the finance manager for Kensington Schools, Kensington Chelsea Schools, she's moving to a different role within my team. So we will have somebody new starting within the next couple of weeks, but I just wanted to formally thank Alison in this forum meeting for the work that she's done supporting Kensington and Chelsea Schools. That was that. Thank you very much. And I would actually like to, last meeting, remember we said fond farewell to Puno Gagda, and I'd like to welcome and introduce Nicola Martin Francis, who is our new senior finance manager on the store side. She's been let off with observation at this meeting.
Next
I'll be
meeting.
joining in at the next meeting.
Okay, fantastic. Is there any other business? All close up. Okay, fantastic. Right, well, that concludes this forum. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, Sharon, yeah.
I've been told since.
Yeah.
Yeah.